They called me the maid for 12 years. My daughter-in-law Victoria introduced me that way to her friends at charity galas in Buckhead. She said it to her colleagues at the company Christmas party. She even said it to my own son Tyler's face, and he just stood there, staring at his shoes, saying nothing. What Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had purchased the 32-story building where Ashford Blackwood Holdings had its headquarters back in 1987, when Victoria was still in middle school. What they didn't know was that every month, that company wrote a rent check for $340,000, made payable to a holding company registered under my name. My name is Rosa Jefferson. I am 68 years old. I graduated from Harvard Business School in 1975, one of 3 black women in my class. And this morning, while my daughter-in-law paced around her marble kitchen planning to throw me into a nursing home, I sat in the corner quietly washing the crystal glasses she had thrown around like trash after last night's dinner party. Victoria didn't know I could hear every word she was saying on the phone. "Mom, I'm telling you, I can't do this anymore," Victoria hissed into her cell phone, her back turned to me. "That woman has been occupying our guest room for 12 years. 12! The Peterson Grant Foundation Gala is next month, and Clarissa practically laughed when she found out my mother-in-law still lives with us." She paused, listening to her mother Elizabeth on the other end. "No, Tyler won't fight me on this. He never does. I already looked into Sunny Pines. It's a nice facility. $4,000 a month. Tyler can afford that easily, or we can just sell off some of the old woman's things. She's got that ugly jewelry box she keeps hidden. Probably costume pieces, but maybe there's something in there." I kept washing the glasses. My hands were steady. I had spent a lifetime keeping my hands steady. The only issue is the paperwork. Preston says the house in Savannah is still in her name. Some kind of deed from her husband. We need her signature to transfer it to Tyler. But she's old, Mom. I'll just slip it in with some insurance forms. She won't read it. Outside the kitchen window, the November sun was setting over Atlanta, turning the oak trees gold. I watched a cardinal land on the bird bath I had given Victoria for her 35th birthday. She hadn't noticed it then. She didn't notice anything I gave her. What Victoria didn't know was that in 48 hours, she would be standing in a boardroom on the 32nd floor of a building she walked into every day, wearing her best Chanel suit, presenting a quarterly marketing report to what her CEO had described as a very important undisclosed investor. That investor would be me. Let me tell you how a 68-year-old black woman becomes invisible. It happens slowly. It happens so slowly you don't even notice the moment you disappear. When my husband Samuel died in 2008, I moved into Tyler and Victoria's house in Buckhead at their insistence. "Just for a little while, Mama," Tyler had said, his eyes red from the funeral, "until you get back on your feet." 12 years later, I was still there. Not because I needed to be, because I had chosen to be. Victoria had assigned me the small guest room at the back of the house, the one next to the laundry. "It gets the best morning light, Rosa," she had said with a smile that never reached her eyes. The room was 700 square feet. My own bedroom in the house I kept in Savannah was 3 times that size, but I nodded. I thanked her. I unpacked my small suitcase, 2 cardigans, 4 dresses, a pair of sensible Clark's walking shoes, and a single jewelry box wrapped in an old silk scarf. That jewelry box held a Mikimoto pearl necklace my husband Samuel had given me in 1980, the night we celebrated buying our first commercial building. It held the Harvard Business School class ring I had never worn in front of Victoria. It held the wedding ring of Samuel's mother, who had cleaned white folks' houses in Birmingham, Alabama, her whole life so her son could become a civil rights attorney. Victoria thought that box was full of costume jewelry. She never bothered to look inside. She also never bothered to ask me what I did before I became Tyler's mother. In the 12 years I lived under her roof, Victoria Ashford never once asked me where I had gone to college. She never asked me what my husband did for a living before he passed. She never asked me how I spent my days. She assumed, as she told her friend Clarissa at a brunch I happened to be serving coffee at, that Tyler's mother basically raised him on welfare checks after his father drank himself to death. Samuel Jefferson had never touched a drop of alcohol in his entire life. Samuel Jefferson had argued 3 cases before the United States Supreme Court. Samuel Jefferson had been offered a federal judgeship by President Clinton in 1998 and had turned it down because he wanted to keep representing civil rights clients in Georgia. But Victoria never asked, and I never told her, because I was watching. I was watching all of them. Here is what a normal Tuesday looked like in the Ashford household. I would wake up at 5:30 in the morning in my little guest room. I would make myself a cup of Earl Grey tea with lemon, the way Samuel had taught me. Then I would sit at the small writing desk by the window and open my iPad, the new one Tyler didn't know I had, and I would read the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, and the Atlanta Business Chronicle. I would check on the performance of Jefferson Holdings, the private real estate and investment company Samuel and I had founded in 1978. I would review the quarterly reports sent to me by Harrison Whitmore, my attorney of 40 years. I would go over the financials of our 27 commercial properties across the Southeast, our investment portfolio managed out of Morgan Stanley in New York, and the Jefferson Family Foundation, which had awarded $180 million in scholarships to young Black women pursuing business degrees since 1985. Then, at 7 o'clock sharp, Victoria would walk into the kitchen in her silk robe and say, without looking at me, "Rosa, can you get the coffee started? And don't use too many beans this time. That Ethiopian roast is expensive." The Ethiopian roast came from a boutique coffee roaster in Midtown. I knew exactly how much it cost because Jefferson Holdings owned that building. I would get the coffee started. I would iron Tyler's shirts while he scrolled through his phone at the breakfast bar, never once looking up to say good morning to his own mother. I would water Victoria's ficus tree, the one she kept forgetting to water herself. I would listen. I would listen to everything. Victoria turned 42 on a Saturday in early October. She invited 60 people to the house for a catered dinner party. The theme, she announced that morning, was old Hollywood glamour. She hired a live jazz quartet. She wore a black Valentino gown that cost $9,400. I know because I saw the receipt on the kitchen counter when I was wiping it down. I was not invited to the party. Victoria had made that clear a week earlier. "Rosa, honey, you'll probably be more comfortable in your room that night. You know, with all the loud music and drinking and everything. I'll have the caterer bring a plate to your door." I had nodded. "That sounds lovely, Victoria. Thank you for thinking of me." But that night, around 9 o'clock, I heard a crash from the dining room. A wine glass had shattered. Victoria came hurrying down the hallway and pounded on my bedroom door. "Rosa, Rosa, I need you. One of the guests spilled red wine all over the rug. Can you come clean it up? The caterers are all busy with dessert." I put down the biography of Thurgood Marshall I was reading. I put on my cardigan. I followed Victoria down the hall. The dining room was full of people I had never met. Preston Ashford III, Victoria's father, was holding court at the head of the table. Elizabeth Ashford, her mother, was showing off her new diamond tennis bracelet to a woman in a fur stole. Cameron Ashford, Victoria's younger brother, was slumped in his chair with his third bourbon, laughing too loudly at something a blonde woman was whispering in his ear. And at the far end of the table sat my son Tyler, staring into his plate, not meeting my eyes. I knelt down on the Persian rug, the one I recognized immediately as a genuine 19th century Tabriz, worth somewhere around $45,000, and I began blotting the red wine with the cloth Victoria had handed me. That's when Cameron looked over and saw me. "Well, well, well," he slurred. "If it isn't the old maid herself. Hey, Mama Rosa, you missed a spot. Get down there, girl." The table went quiet. The blonde woman next to Cameron giggled nervously. Preston Ashford actually chuckled, and took a sip of his scotch. "Cameron, be nice to the help," Preston said, in a voice that suggested he found the whole thing mildly amusing. "She does good work." I kept blotting the rug. Victoria stood in the doorway. She said nothing. She did nothing. She let it happen. I looked up, just once. I looked at my son. Tyler's face was red. His jaw was tight. His hands were gripping the edge of his chair so hard his knuckles had gone white. But he didn't say a word. He didn't stand up. He didn't tell his brother-in-law to shut his mouth. He didn't tell his wife to get her family under control. He didn't walk over to his 68-year-old mother, who was on her hands and knees cleaning up a stranger's wine spill, and help her up. He just sat there. And he looked away. I finished cleaning the rug. I took the wine-stained cloth to the kitchen. I washed my hands. I went back to my room. Then I did something I had not done in 12 years. I sat down at my little writing desk. I opened the bottom drawer. I reached into the false back of that drawer. Samuel had built it himself when we first bought the house in 1982. And I pulled out an old flip phone, a black, scratched-up flip phone that had been sitting there, charged and waiting, for over a decade. I opened it. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. Rosa. Harrison Whitmore's voice was as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. It's 11 o'clock at night. Are you all right? Harrison, I said quietly. My voice did not shake. Activate Clause 17B. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Harrison Whitmore, the attorney who had worked alongside Samuel and me for 4 decades, said one word. When? 14 days, I said. I want the board meeting scheduled for 14 days from today. I want every seat filled. And Harrison? Yes, Rosa? I want them to know exactly who I am. It's time. I closed the phone. I put it back in the drawer. Then I walked to the window and looked out at the Atlanta skyline. The skyline where I owned 11 buildings, including the one glowing gold in the distance on the corner of Peachtree Street, where my daughter-in-law would arrive for work on Monday morning, utterly unaware that her life as she knew it was already over. I took off my cardigan. I put on my nightgown. And for the first time in 12 years, I did not cry myself to sleep. I slept like a woman who had finally run out of patience. The next morning was Sunday, and Sundays in Victoria's house meant brunch at the country club. Victoria and Tyler would leave at 10, and they would not return until 4 in the afternoon. Preston and Elizabeth often joined them. Cameron sometimes did, when he wasn't too hungover. This was my favorite time of the week. After they left, I would walk out to the garage. I would get into the car Victoria believed I did not own, a quiet dark green 2019 Lexus sedan registered to Jefferson Holdings. And I would drive 30 miles south to an unmarked office building in a quiet part of town. There, in a conference room on the 3rd floor, I would meet with 7 other women. We called ourselves the Magnolia Circle. Dorothy Washington, a former federal judge, had served on the bench for 22 years before retiring. Beverly Coleman had been the first black woman partner at a major Atlanta law firm. Gloria Henderson had built a chain of black-owned pharmacies across 3 states. Patricia Walker ran a private equity firm. Valerie Brooks had founded one of the largest black women's health networks in the South. Maxine Thornton, my oldest friend, had retired as a senior vice president at Coca-Cola. And Ruth Ellison, the youngest of us at 61, was a cardiothoracic surgeon who had trained at Johns Hopkins. We had been meeting for 30 years. We had funded businesses. We had mentored young women. We had quietly shaped more of Atlanta's civic life than anyone would ever write a book about. And every single one of them knew what I had been doing in Victoria's house for the past 12 years. Rosa, Dorothy said that Sunday morning as I poured myself a cup of coffee and took my seat at the long oak table. You look different today. I called Harrison last night, I said. It's time. The room went still. Beverly Coleman set down her pen. You sure, Rosa? They tried to take my house last night, I said. Not out loud. They don't know I heard them. But Victoria and her mother and Preston have been scheming to take the Savannah house out of my name and put it in Tyler's. Victoria is planning to slip the transfer paperwork into a stack of insurance forms and have me sign it without reading it. Dorothy Washington, Judge Dorothy Washington, who had sent 211 elder abuse perpetrators to prison during her career on the federal bench, set her coffee cup down so hard it rattled the saucer. That's elder fraud, she said quietly. That's a federal crime. I know, I said. And Preston has been embezzling from Ashford Blackwood for the last 6 years. $12 million as of our last audit. He thinks the funds are hidden well enough that the board won't notice. He doesn't know that Magnolia Trust, the majority shareholder he's never been able to identify, has been auditing him the entire time. Gloria Henderson let out a low whistle. And Cameron, I continued, has been cooking the books on his own side business. I believe the IRS has begun preliminary inquiries. Harrison has the documentation. What about Tyler? Maxine asked very gently. Maxine had held my hand at Samuel's funeral. She had known Tyler since he was a boy. She knew what this question cost me to answer. I was quiet for a long moment. Tyler, I said finally, has a choice to make, and I am going to give him the chance to make it. Beverly nodded. How? I'm going to meet him for coffee this week, I said. Alone, just me and my son, and I'm going to ask him one question. What question? Dorothy asked. I looked out the window at the magnolia tree blooming in the courtyard. I thought about Samuel. I thought about the day Tyler was born, in 1981, when Samuel had held him up in the hospital room and whispered, "This boy is going to change the world, Rosa. You mark my words." I thought about the man my son had become. I'm going to ask him, I said, if he remembers what his father taught him. I'm going to ask him who he is when no one is watching. The 7 women around the table were silent. Then Dorothy Washington, who was as close to a sister as I had ever had, reached across the table and took my hand. "Rosa," she said, "whatever he says, you did your job. You raised him right. Whatever happens next is on him." I nodded, but inside I was not so sure, because I had watched my son sit at that dinner table last night, and I had watched him say nothing while his own mother was humiliated in front of 60 people, and I had realized something I had been trying not to realize for 12 years. Maybe I hadn't raised him as well as I thought. Maybe Victoria had finished the job. Maybe my beautiful, brilliant, brown-eyed boy had become a man who would choose his wife's approval over his mother's dignity. But I was still going to give him the chance to prove me wrong, because that is what mothers do. We keep opening the door, even when we already know what's on the other side. I drove back to Buckhead that afternoon. I parked the Lexus 3 blocks away, in the driveway of an empty house that Jefferson Holdings owned. I walked the rest of the way. I came in through the back gate, changed into my old cardigan and my Clark's walking shoes, and by the time Tyler and Victoria came home from brunch at 4:15, I was in the kitchen, making a pot of tea. Victoria walked past me without saying hello. Tyler walked past me without saying hello. But this time, for the first time in 12 years, I did not feel small when they did it. This time, I felt something else. I felt patient. I felt prepared. And I felt for the first time in a very long time, like Samuel Jefferson's wife again. To understand what happened in that boardroom 2 weeks later, you have to understand who I was before I was Tyler's mother, before I was Victoria's maid, before I became the invisible woman in the guest room at the back of the house. You have to understand who Rosa May Jefferson was when she still had a first name. I was born in 1957 in a small town called Rockingham, North Carolina. My father, Elijah Mayfield, was a tobacco farmer who could barely read. My mother, Clara Mayfield, worked as a seamstress in a white woman's dress shop downtown, where she was not allowed to use the front entrance until 1964. I was the youngest of 6 children, the only girl. My 5 older brothers all went to work in the tobacco fields by the time they were 12 years old. But my mother who had taught herself to read by studying the labels on the fabric bolts in that dress shop, my mother looked at me when I was 7 years old and said something I have never forgotten. "Rosa May, you are not going to scrub floors for white women. You are going to own the building they scrub floors in." She said it like a prophecy, like a command, like she was speaking to God and to me at the same time. I believed her. I was 7 years old, and I believed her with my whole heart. In 1967, I won a scholarship to an integrated school in Raleigh. I was the only black child in my class for 3 years. I learned very early how to be the smartest person in the room while pretending not to be. I learned how to make myself small enough that the white teachers wouldn't feel threatened, but large enough inside my own mind that I never once forgot who I was. That skill, that particular, painful, finely tuned skill of knowing exactly when to speak and when to stay silent, would serve me for the rest of my life. In 1971, I entered Spelman College on a full scholarship. I studied economics. I graduated summa cum laude in 1975. That same spring, I received an acceptance letter from Harvard Business School. I was one of 3 black women in my MBA class. I met Samuel Jefferson during my second year at Harvard. He was a third-year law student at Harvard Law, 6 years older than me, the son of a housekeeper from Birmingham, Alabama, who had saved every dollar she earned for 40 years to put her only son through school. Samuel was tall and quiet, with eyes that seemed to see everything and judge nothing. He was the kind of man who could sit in a room full of Harvard professors and listen more than he spoke, and when he finally did speak, everyone would lean forward to hear what he had to say. I knew I was going to marry Samuel Jefferson the night he took me to a civil rights rally in Boston and spent the entire evening listening to an elderly black woman tell him about her husband, who had been lynched in Mississippi in 1952. Samuel didn't offer solutions. He didn't try to fix anything. He just listened to her. He held her hand. And when she was done, he said, "Ma'am, thank you for trusting me with that. I will carry it with me." We married in 1977 in a small ceremony at his mother's church in Birmingham. We moved to Atlanta that same year with $4,800 in our savings account and a dream neither of us had yet spoken out loud. In 1978, Samuel and I bought our first commercial property. It was a rundown 3-story building on Auburn Avenue, the heart of Atlanta's historically black business district, which had been boarded up for 6 years. The owner, an elderly white man from Buckhead, wanted to sell it for $62,000. Everyone told us we were insane. A young black couple just starting out, pouring our savings into a crumbling building in what everyone at the time called that part of town. We bought it anyway. Samuel practiced law on the first floor. I ran a small bookkeeping and investment advisory business on the second floor, mostly serving black-owned businesses that no white bank would lend to. We rented out the third floor to a dentist named Dr. Theodore Brooks, who paid us $340 a month. By 1982, we owned 3 buildings. By 1985, we owned 7. By 1990, Jefferson Holdings LLC owned 14 commercial properties across Atlanta, valued at approximately $18 million. We had hired our first full-time property manager. We had taken on 3 associates at Samuel's law firm. I was sitting on the board of the Atlanta Urban League, and we had a 9-year-old son named Tyler. Tyler Jefferson was the joy of my life. He had Samuel's quiet, watchful eyes and my fire. He was brilliant in school, gentle with other children, and obsessed with jazz records. By the time he was 10, he could tell you the difference between a Miles Davis recording from 1959 and one from 1961. Samuel used to take him to Blue Note jazz clubs in Midtown on Friday nights, and I would come home from work to find the 2 of them asleep on the couch at midnight. Tyler curled up against his father's shoulder. I don't know exactly when I lost him. I think it happened slowly, the way everything important happens slowly. I think it started when Tyler went to Stanford for his undergraduate degree. He came home for Christmas his junior year with a different way of talking, a different way of dressing, a different way of looking at the house we had raised him in. He mentioned a girl he was dating, a girl named Victoria Ashford, whose family, he said, summered in Nantucket. I should have known then. I should have known the day he brought Victoria home to meet us, in the summer of 2010, and she walked through our front door in her Tory Burch flats and her cashmere cardigan, and she looked around our living room. Our beautiful living room with Samuel's bookshelves full of first editions, with the oil painting by Romari Bearden that Samuel had saved for 2 years to buy me for our 15th anniversary, with the Steinway piano I had learned to play on as a little girl. And she said, with a practiced smile, "Oh, Mrs. Jefferson, what a quaint home you have." Samuel, standing behind me, squeezed my shoulder gently. It was his silent way of telling me to breathe, to not say what I was thinking, to give this young woman a chance. I gave her a chance. I gave her 13 years of chances. Samuel died in the spring of 2008. Pancreatic cancer, it came fast, and it took him in 11 weeks. At the end, he lay in the hospice bed we had set up in the sunroom of our house in Ansley Park, the morning light falling across his face, and he took my hand and he said, "Rosa, you remember what your mama told you when you were 7 years old?" I nodded. I couldn't speak. "You own the building now, baby girl. You own all the buildings." He died the next morning. At the time of his death, Jefferson Holdings owned 23 commercial properties across 4 states. The combined valuation was $287 million. Samuel left everything to me in his will: the business, the properties, the investment accounts, the deeds to our 3 personal residences. He had one request. He had written it in his own hand on the inside cover of the will: "Take care of our boy, but do not let him become a man who does not know who he is." I was 51 years old. I had just buried my husband of 31 years. I had built an empire, and I was about to watch my only son marry a woman who would spend the next 12 years trying to erase me from his life. Tyler married Victoria Ashford in May 2011 at a $600,000 wedding on her parents' estate in Palm Beach. The wedding itself was the first sign. Victoria's mother Elizabeth had seated me, the groom's mother, at a table in the back, with Preston's elderly cousins and a handful of cousins nobody else wanted to entertain. The Ashford family sat at the head table. Tyler sat at the head table. I sat 40 feet away, near the restrooms, while my own son exchanged vows with a woman who had insisted the wedding be a very traditional old Atlanta family affair. Ashford money was old, yes. Money the Ashford family had earned from their grandfather's work as a cotton merchant in Savannah in the 1920s. Money that had, if you traced it back far enough, come from the backs of people who looked like my husband's grandmother. I did not say a word about it. Not at the wedding, not afterward, not ever. Because by then, I had begun to notice something. The Ashford family did not just dislike me, they did not see me. And I realized, sitting at that back table, sipping champagne alone while the band played At Last by Etta James and my son danced with his new bride, that invisibility was going to be the most powerful tool I had ever been handed in my entire life. 6 months after Samuel died, Harrison Whitmore came to me with a problem. Preston Ashford III, my new son-in-law's father, the man I had just shared a wedding table with months earlier, had approached Harrison through an intermediary. Ashford Blackwood Holdings, the family company, was on the verge of bankruptcy. Preston had made a series of disastrous investments in commercial real estate, lost $83 million in the 2008 crash, and was frantically looking for a private investor willing to inject capital without asking too many questions. He needed $50 million. He needed it fast, and he was willing to hand over a controlling stake in the company to anyone who would save him. The intermediary had no idea that Jefferson Holdings was owned by the same woman Preston had spent his son's wedding pretending not to notice. Harrison had come to me in my home office, very late at night, with a stack of financials and a single question. "Rosa, do you want to bail out the man whose son just married your son?" I read the financials for 20 minutes. I read them carefully. Then I looked up at Harrison. "Structure it through a shell company," I said. "Something neutral, something southern, something beautiful." Harrison smiled, just a little. "What do you want to call it?" "Magnolia Trust." Harrison wrote it down. "Terms?" "Magnolia Trust acquires 51% of Ashford Blackwood," I said. "Preston keeps his position as ceremonial chairman. He retains his office, his title, his car. On paper, he is still the face of the company. But every major decision, every acquisition, every divestment, every compensation package above $250,000 must be approved by Magnolia Trust." Harrison wrote quickly. "And you want this concealed?" "Completely," I said. "The identity of Magnolia Trust's principal owner is to remain sealed. Not even Preston knows who he's dealing with. He thinks it's a family office out of Charleston. Let him keep thinking that." "Rosa," Harrison set down his pen. "Why?" I thought about that question for a long moment. I thought about Samuel's words in the hospice bed. Do not let him become a man who does not know who he is. I thought about my son, who had just married into a family that saw me as a piece of furniture at the wedding. I thought about my mother, who had told me when I was 7 years old, "You are going to own the building they scrub floors in." And I thought about something I had never said out loud to anyone, including Samuel. "Because, Harrison," I said quietly, "I want to know who they really are. All of them. Preston, Elizabeth, Victoria, my own son. I want to know who they are when they think nobody important is watching. I want to know what my son chose when he married that woman. And the only way to find out is to let them believe I am nothing." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Clause 17B. "What's Clause 17B? He picked up his pen again. "I'll write it into the contract. A single clause buried in the back. If at any point you decide to reveal your identity as the principal owner of Magnolia Trust, you can activate it with a single phone call. 72 hours later, you walk into a shareholder meeting, and everything changes. Permanently." I nodded slowly. "Write it in, Harrison." He did. That was in December 2013. For the next 12 years, every month, Ashford Blackwood Holdings wrote 2 checks. One for $340,000, the rent on the headquarters building at Peachtree Street, a building Preston did not know I owned. One for the quarterly dividend to Magnolia Trust, a check Preston signed personally into an account he thought belonged to some old Charleston family. Every month for 12 years, my son-in-law's father sent me millions of dollars in dividends. And every evening, his daughter called me the maid. There is one more thing you should know about me before I tell you what happened next. Every month I drove down to Savannah. I told Victoria I was visiting my cousin. She never asked for a name. She never asked for an address. She never asked anything. I didn't have a cousin in Savannah. What I had, in Savannah, was an 8,400 square foot oceanfront estate on Tybee Island, with 6 bedrooms, a private dock, a library Samuel had designed himself in the last year of his life, and a guest house where the Magnolia Circle met for our annual retreat every June. The estate was worth $8.3 million. It had been Samuel's wedding gift to me on our 25th anniversary. Victoria and Tyler had never been inside that house. Victoria didn't know it existed. Preston Ashford did not know it existed. But Victoria knew one thing about Savannah. She knew the house was in my name. And that deed, that simple piece of paper, transferred to me in 1995, was the document she and Preston and Elizabeth had been trying to steal for the past 6 months. Because Preston had been inside that house, once, without my knowledge. He had been inside in 2019, during one of my trips to Europe, when Victoria had somehow gotten hold of a spare key. She and Preston had walked through every room. They had seen the art collection. They had seen Samuel's library. They had seen the Steinway grand piano in the conservatory. And they had realized something that changed everything. They had realized that the poor old woman living in the guest room at the back of Victoria's house in Buckhead was in fact sitting on assets that none of them could explain. They had spent the next 6 months trying to figure out where my money had come from. They had never figured it out. So they had done the next best thing. They had decided to take the Savannah house first, by fraud, and worry about the rest later. It was a Tuesday evening, the 3rd of November, at exactly 8:17 p.m. I was watering the orchids outside Preston's office window. The office Victoria had converted from what used to be our formal dining room. I had made it a habit over the past several months to water those orchids at that exact time, 8:15 in the evening, every Tuesday, because that was when Preston, Elizabeth, and Victoria held their weekly family strategy meeting. They did not know I listened. They assumed the old woman was just watering plants. The window was cracked open an inch. I had cracked it myself, earlier that morning, to give the orchids some air. I stood very still in the dark garden. I did not move. I barely breathed. Inside the office, Victoria was pacing. "I'm done waiting, Dad. The gala is in 3 weeks. I cannot walk into that ballroom one more time and have Clarissa Peterson Grant ask me how my sweet old mother-in-law is doing. I want her out of my house." Elizabeth's voice. "Honey, we've discussed this. Sunny Pines has a room available on the 15th. $4,000 a month. It's a lovely facility." Preston. "The question is the Savannah house. I had Jeremy's paralegal pull the deed records again last week. It's still in her name, untouched since 1995. Samuel left it to her free and clear." Victoria. "So what do we do about it?" Preston. "I've had a document drawn up. A quitclaim deed transferring the Savannah property to Tyler. It's buried in a packet of what looks like Medicare supplemental paperwork. Insurance forms. Nothing that would alarm her. She'll sign it without reading it. She always signs whatever Tyler's name is on." Elizabeth. "Preston, are you sure that's legal?" Preston laughed. Actually laughed. "Elizabeth, darling, who is going to contest it? The woman is 68 years old. She lives in our guest room. She doesn't have a lawyer. She barely has a bank account. Even if she noticed, which she won't, what's she going to do? Sue us?" Victoria. "What's it worth? The Savannah house?" Preston. "I had Jeremy get an estimate. 8, maybe 8.5 million. Plus there's an art collection inside. Jeremy got photos on his phone when we were down there in 2019. There's a Romare Bearden in there that alone is worth 2 million at auction." There was a pause. Then Victoria said something I will remember for the rest of my life. "God, can you imagine? $8 million just sitting there, and that old woman doesn't even know what she's got. She probably thinks that Bearden is a decoration her husband picked up at a yard sale." Elizabeth. "Well, we're fixing that now, aren't we?" The three of them laughed. I stood in the garden, in the dark, with my watering can in my hand, and I did not move. And then, because the universe has a very particular sense of timing, I heard the door of the office open. Tyler's voice. "Dad, Mom told me you wanted to talk to me about something." Preston. "Come in, son. Close the door." I heard the door close. I heard Preston explain the plan. The nursing home, the quitclaim deed, the insurance forms, the Savannah house, the Bearden, the $8.5 million. I heard Tyler say nothing for a very long time. And then I heard my son, who had been raised by Samuel Jefferson, the man who had argued civil rights cases before the Supreme Court. I heard my son say, "If it's what Victoria wants, and if it's good for the company, then I'm sure Mama will understand." I closed my eyes in the dark garden. I put down the watering can, very gently, on the flagstone path, and something inside me, something that had been holding on for 12 years, something that had been hoping, stupidly, foolishly, desperately, that my son would one day remember who his father was. Something inside me finally let go. It did not break. It released. It was the quietest sound in the world. Nobody heard it but me. I walked back into the house through the kitchen door. I hung up my gardening gloves. I washed my hands at the sink. Then I went up to my room, closed the door, and sat down at my writing desk. I opened the bottom drawer. I reached into the false back. I pulled out the black flip phone. This time, when Harrison Whitmore answered, I did not ask him to activate Clause 17B. He had already activated it 8 days ago on the night of Victoria's birthday party. This time I said something different. Harrison, I need one more thing. Anything, Rosa. I need to meet with my son, alone, face to face, before the board meeting. When? This week, Wednesday. A coffee shop somewhere he won't expect to see me. Somewhere public enough that Victoria won't follow. You're giving him a chance. I'm giving him a chance. Rosa. Harrison's voice softened. What are you going to say to him? I thought about Samuel and the note he had written in the back of his will. I thought about my son at 9 years old, asleep against his father's shoulder on the couch, with a Miles Davis record spinning quietly on the turntable. I thought about the man my son had become. I'm going to ask him, I said, if he remembers who his father was. 3 days later, I walked into a Starbucks on West Paces Ferry Road at 2:15 in the afternoon. Tyler was already there, sitting at a corner table looking at his phone. He was wearing a gray cashmere sweater, the one Victoria had bought him for his 45th birthday, and he looked tired, older than I remembered. There were lines around his eyes I had not noticed before. He looked up when I sat down across from him. His face went through 3 expressions in half a second: confusion, alarm, and something else. Something I could not read. Mama, what are you doing here? How did you even get here? I took an Uber, I said. That was a lie. I had driven myself in the Lexus. I had parked 3 blocks away. Is everything okay? Is something wrong? I looked at my son for a long moment. Tyler, I said. Do you remember what your father told you the summer you turned 16? Tyler blinked. Mama, what? Do you remember? He was quiet. He told me, Tyler said slowly, to be careful of becoming a man who forgets who he is. Yes. Mama, where is this coming from? I looked at my son's hands, his long fingers, his father's hands, exactly. Tyler, I said, I want you to think about a question. You don't have to answer me today. You don't have to answer me ever. But I want you to carry this question with you. He waited. Who are you, I said, when no one is watching? Who are you when it costs you something to be a good man? Who are you when the choice is between what's comfortable and what's right? His face did something then, something I hadn't seen since he was a boy. His eyes filled up. Mama, I'm not asking you to answer me, I said. I'm asking you to ask yourself. Before Saturday. Saturday? What's Saturday? I stood up. I put on my coat. I picked up my purse. I leaned down and kissed my son on the top of his head, the way I used to when he was small. You'll see, baby, I said. Then I walked out of the coffee shop, and I got into the Lexus he did not know I owned, and I drove home. Behind me, at the corner table, my son sat completely still. For the first time in 12 years, Tyler Jefferson did not immediately reach for his phone to text Victoria about what had just happened. He just sat there. And he thought about his father. What the Ashford family did not know, what Victoria and Preston and Elizabeth and Cameron could not have imagined, was that the moment I hung up that black flip phone on the night of the birthday party, the clock had started ticking. 14 days, 236 business hours. Time enough for an old woman to do everything she had spent 12 years quietly preparing to do. Time enough for a family to destroy itself while believing it was winning. The morning after this garden incident, I told Victoria I was going to visit my cousin in Savannah. She barely looked up from her iPad. Fine, Rosa. Just make sure you're back by the 18th. I need you here for the painters. Of course, honey. I packed my small suitcase, 2 cardigans, my Clark's walking shoes, and underneath everything, folded carefully inside an old pillowcase, the Armani suit I had not worn in 12 years. I drove the Lexus to Hartsfield-Jackson. I parked in the long-term lot. I got on a Delta flight to Savannah at 11:42 a.m., first class, under my maiden name, Rosa Mayfield. Harrison Whitmore was waiting for me at the arrivals gate in Savannah, along with Dorothy Washington. Both of them were carrying leather briefcases. Neither of them was smiling. It's all set, Harrison said as we walked to the car. The SEC has been briefed. Agent Marcus Holloway at the Atlanta field office of the FBI has the embezzlement file. IRS Criminal Investigation Division has the Cameron file. Everyone is in a holding pattern, waiting for your green light. Good. Dorothy looked at me as we drove across the Talmadge Bridge toward Tybee Island. Rosa, are you ready for this? I watched the marsh grass go by outside the window. The same marsh grass Samuel and I had watched together on our first visit to this coast in 1980, when we were young and broke and in love, and had sneaked onto a public beach to watch the sun come up. I have been ready, I said, for 37 years. I just didn't know what I was getting ready for. At the Tybee Island estate, the three of us spread out in Samuel's library, the library he had designed in the last year of his life, with the high bookshelves and the leaded glass windows and the oil painting of his mother over the fireplace. For 3 days we worked. We reviewed every document that had passed between Magnolia Trust and Ashford Blackwood Holdings since December 2013, every quarterly report, every tax filing, every board resolution, and we traced, penny by penny, the $12,472,000 that Preston Ashford III had quietly diverted from the company treasury into 7 shell accounts spread across Delaware, Nevada, and the Cayman Islands. He got sloppy in 2022, Dorothy said, sliding a folder across the desk to me. Look at this. He used the same law firm to register 3 of the shells, and then he paid that law firm out of a company operating account. That's a paper trail a first-year prosecutor could follow. Greed makes people stupid, Harrison murmured. No, I said quietly. Contempt makes people stupid. Preston Ashford has been running this scheme for 6 years because it never once occurred to him that the anonymous investor in Charleston might be paying attention. He thought nobody was watching. I looked up from the folder. He was wrong. On the morning of the 4th day, Harrison placed a call to James Holloway, the CEO of Ashford Blackwood. James Holloway had been Preston's hand-picked CEO for 9 years. He was a smooth, ambitious man in his mid-50s, the kind of corporate operator who knew exactly which side of a conflict to be on at any given moment. He had no particular loyalty to Preston. He had every loyalty to his own career. Harrison was brief on the phone. Mr. Holloway, this is Harrison Whitmore, speaking on behalf of Magnolia Trust. We would like to schedule an emergency session of the Ashford Blackwood Board of Directors in 14 days. The principal of Magnolia Trust will be attending in person. All board members must be present, no exceptions. There was a very long silence on Holloway's end. Mr. Whitmore, he finally said, Magnolia Trust has never attended a board meeting in 12 years. Mr. Holloway, that is about to change. May I ask, who is the principal of Magnolia Trust? You may ask, Harrison said politely, but I am not authorized to answer. You will meet them on the day of the meeting. Mr. Whitmore, is there something I should be concerned about? Harrison paused. Mr. Holloway, let me say this to you as one professional to another. You have been an honest CEO in a dishonest boardroom for 9 years. Whatever is coming, you are not the target. But I would strongly suggest that before the board meeting, you begin quietly locking down the company's financial records. Preserve everything. Back everything up. Do not delete a single email. Do you understand me? Another long silence. Yes, James Holloway said quietly. I understand you perfectly, Mr. Whitmore. Harrison hung up. He looked across the desk at me. He knows, I said. He suspects. He doesn't know what, but he knows something is coming, and he is now going to spend the next 14 days being the most cooperative CEO in the history of American business. I smiled just slightly. Good. While I was in Savannah reviewing documents in Samuel's library, Victoria was hosting a brunch. I know this because Harrison had arranged for one of the staff at the Buckhead house, a young woman named Denise, who had worked as Victoria's housekeeper for 6 months, and who Victoria had yelled at on 3 separate occasions for being lazy, to quietly keep me informed. Denise had been working for Jefferson Holdings' investigative division for exactly 7 months. Victoria had hired her through an agency I owned. On the 7th day, Denise reported that Victoria had invited 6 friends over for mimosas and eggs Benedict. During the brunch, Victoria had announced, and I have the audio because Denise had been wearing a recording device the entire time, that she was finally getting the old woman out of the house. "Oh my God, Vicky, how did you manage it?" one of her friends had squealed. "Well," Victoria had said, "between you and me, Daddy worked out a little financial arrangement. Rosa's signing some paperwork on the 21st. She'll be at Sunny Pines by the 1st of December. And the cherry on top? We're getting her Savannah house in the deal. Apparently Samuel left her this whole estate down there that she's been sitting on for years, like some kind of hoarder. $8 million, can you believe it? And she had us thinking she was poor. Another friend. What are you going to do with it? Sell it, Victoria had said lightly. Put the money toward the Aspen chalet Tyler's been wanting. Honestly, it's not even really stealing. She won't even know the difference. At Sunny Pines, they mostly watch game shows. The women had laughed. Denise had kept the recording running. Harrison printed the transcript and added it to the file. On the morning of the 8th day, Cameron Ashford received a letter from the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. The letter informed him that he was under investigation for tax fraud relating to an unreported $4.3 million in income channeled through a consulting firm he had been running on the side. A consulting firm that, according to the IRS, appeared to have no actual clients and existed primarily to funnel money out of Ashford Blackwood's marketing budget into Cameron's personal accounts. The letter informed Cameron that he had 30 days to respond through counsel. Cameron, according to what Dorothy's contacts at the Bureau later told me, laughed when he opened the letter. He texted a picture of it to his father. Dad, looks like the IRS is on a fishing expedition. I'll have Jeremy handle it. No big deal. Preston, reading the text in his office at Ashford Blackwood, frowned. Something in the letter bothered him. The specificity, the named shell company, the exact dollar amounts. He called Jeremy, his family attorney. Jeremy told him, Preston, this is not a fishing expedition. They have documentation. Someone inside the company has been talking. Preston went pale. For the first time in 12 years, Preston Ashford III began to feel the first cold breath of the iceberg he was sailing toward. But he still did not know it was an iceberg. He thought it was a snowball. On the 10th day, I went shopping. Dorothy drove me to Saks Fifth Avenue in Buckhead. I had not been inside Saks in 12 years. The last time I had been there was in 2013, when I had purchased a pair of pearl earrings for Samuel's sister's funeral. The sales associate at the designer suits counter looked up when I walked in wearing my cardigan and my Clark's walking shoes. Her smile was polite but thin. She assumed, I suspect, that I was lost. Ma'am, can I help you find something? Yes, I said. I would like to see your Armani suits, please. Size 12. Charcoal gray, not black. And I'd like your best Louboutin pumps in a low heel. Size 9. Her smile changed. Of course, ma'am. Right this way. I spent $8,400 that afternoon. Dorothy waited for me in the lounge, drinking a complimentary glass of champagne and reading the Atlanta Journal-Constitution with a small, satisfied smile. When I came out of the dressing room, standing in the charcoal Armani, with my hair freshly done at the salon on Peachtree, with my Mikimoto pearls around my neck for the first time in 12 years, Dorothy set down her champagne glass and she looked at me, and her eyes filled up. Rosa Jefferson, she said very quietly. There you are. On the 13th day, I came home to Buckhead. I walked in through the kitchen door at 6:45 in the evening, wearing my old cardigan again, carrying my small suitcase. Victoria was in the dining room on her phone. She did not look up. Rosa, is that you? Did you remember about the painters? Yes, honey, I remembered. Good. And listen, I need you to stay here on Saturday. All day. Can you do that? I have an important meeting at the office in the morning. Some investor thing. Preston's acting weird about it, but I should be home by 2, and then we need to have a conversation. About some paperwork. I stood very still in the kitchen doorway. Paperwork? Yeah, just some insurance things, Medicare stuff. It's boring, but we need to get your signature on it, okay? Okay, Victoria. She went back to her phone. I walked down the hall to my little guest room. I closed the door behind me. I sat down on the edge of the bed. On my nightstand was a framed photograph of Samuel and me, taken in 1990, standing in front of our first building on Auburn Avenue. We looked impossibly young. Samuel was wearing a gray suit. I was wearing a blue dress with a white collar. We were both smiling. I picked up the frame. I held it for a long time. Samuel, I said out loud to the empty room. Tomorrow. I'm doing it tomorrow. I could almost hear his voice in the silence. You take care of our boy, but do not let him become a man who does not know who he is. I know, baby, I whispered. I'm trying. I set down the frame. I lay down on top of the covers, still wearing my cardigan and my walking shoes. I did not sleep much that night, but I was not afraid. I had not been afraid of anything in a very long time. Ashford Blackwood Holdings headquarters, 32nd floor, Peachtree Street. The boardroom at the top of the tower had floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides. From the east wall, you could see all the way to Stone Mountain, 15 miles away, rising out of the autumn haze. The conference table was a single slab of polished black walnut, 24 feet long, with 14 leather chairs arranged around it. At 8:58 a.m., the board members began to file in. James Holloway, the CEO, wearing a charcoal suit, carrying a binder, his face carefully blank. The 7 independent directors, a mix of retired executives, a former mayor, a Georgia Tech professor, and a woman who sat on the board of the Atlanta Symphony. Cameron Ashford, looking hungover, slumped in a chair near the back. Tyler, my son, arriving at 8:59, wearing the navy suit Samuel had bought him for his college graduation. His eyes were tired. He had not slept well in several nights. He did not know why. Victoria, sweeping in at 9 o'clock exactly, wearing a cream-colored Chanel suit, her hair freshly highlighted, her Cartier watch catching the light. She smiled brilliantly at the room, oblivious. And Preston Ashford III, in his usual seat at the head of the table, wearing a dark blue suit and a red silk tie, a small, nervous smile fixed on his face. "Good morning, everyone," Preston said. "As you know, today we have a very unusual meeting. Magnolia Trust, our majority shareholder for the past 12 years, has requested an in-person session. I suspect it has to do with the company's expansion into Asian markets, which we all know has been—" The boardroom doors opened. 2 people walked in first. Harrison Whitmore, 68 years old, silver-haired, carrying a single leather briefcase, and Dorothy Washington, in a tailored red blazer, walking with the precise, unhurried authority of a federal judge. And then, 3 steps behind them, I walked in. Charcoal Armani suit, Louboutin pumps, hair swept up, Mikimoto pearls at my throat, Harvard-class ring on my right hand, visible for the first time in 48 years. I walked past the long conference table. I walked past the stunned faces. I walked to the head of the table, to Preston's seat. And for a moment, 1 full second, nobody in the room understood what they were seeing. Then Victoria's Mont Blanc pen slipped out of her hand and clattered onto the conference table. Preston stood up halfway out of his chair, his mouth open. What is—" Cameron squinted at me across the table, his hungover brain lagging. "Wait, that's the—" Tyler's face had gone completely white. Harrison Whitmore, standing calmly beside me, placed his leather briefcase on the table and clicked it open. He withdrew a 300-page document bound in navy blue. He set it down in front of me. Dorothy Washington placed a second file, this one marked with the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, beside the first. And then I spoke. My voice was quiet. It was clear. It carried to every corner of that boardroom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who do not know me, allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is Rosa Jefferson. I hold a master's in business administration from Harvard Business School, class of 1975. I am the founder, president, and sole owner of Jefferson Holdings, LLC, a private investment company based in Atlanta with current assets under management of $341 million. I am also the sole principal and beneficial owner of Magnolia Trust, which means that for the past 12 years, I have been the majority shareholder of the company you all work for. I own this building. I have owned this building since 1987. Your company pays me $340,000 in rent every month and has done so since 2006. And I turned my head. I looked directly at Victoria. I am the woman you have called your maid for the past 12 years. The silence in that boardroom was the loudest silence I have ever heard in my life. Victoria's face had gone the color of ash. Her hand was pressed against her mouth. She was making a small, high sound that was not quite a word. Preston was clutching his chest. One of the independent directors stood up halfway, looking alarmed. "Preston, are you—" "I am fine," Preston wheezed. He was not fine. He was the exact color of wet paper. Cameron had pushed himself all the way back from the table, as if trying to put distance between himself and whatever was happening. And Tyler, my son, my boy. Tyler was staring at me. His eyes were full of tears. His hands were gripping the edge of the table the way they had gripped the edge of his chair at Victoria's birthday party. But this time, he was not looking away. This time, he was looking straight at me. Dorothy Washington spoke next. Her voice was the voice of the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I am the Honorable Dorothy L. Washington, retired United States District Judge for the Northern District of Georgia. I am here today as personal counsel to Mrs. Jefferson. The documents in front of you contain evidence of the following. An ongoing pattern of embezzlement conducted by Preston Ashford III, beginning in 2019 and continuing through October of this year, totaling $12,472,000, diverted from this company's operating accounts into 7 offshore shell entities. This evidence has been shared with the FBI's Atlanta field office. 2. An ongoing pattern of tax fraud conducted by Cameron Ashford, involving the misrepresentation of approximately $4.3 million in income. This evidence is in the active possession of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. 3. A conspiracy to commit elder financial fraud undertaken by Preston Ashford, Elizabeth Ashford, and Victoria Ashford to deprive Mrs. Jefferson of real property valued at $8.3 million through the use of a fraudulent deed transfer disguised as insurance paperwork. This conspiracy was recorded in full at the Ashford residence on the evening of November 3rd. Dorothy paused. That recording is in my possession. It is admissible. It is frankly devastating. Victoria made a small sound and put her head down on the conference table. Preston sat down heavily in his chair. His hands were shaking. Cameron started to speak. "Dad, I told you that IRS letter was—" "Shut up, Cameron," Preston whispered. I stepped forward to the head of the table. I placed both hands on the navy blue binder. I looked at the 7 independent directors. I looked at James Holloway. I looked at the former mayor and the Georgia Tech professor and the woman who sat on the board of the Atlanta Symphony. I looked at my son, and I spoke the sentence I had spent 12 years waiting to speak. For 12 years you have looked through me as if I were not there. That did not make me smaller. It gave me the time I needed to become a woman you will never dare to look past again. Then, because I am my mother's daughter, and my mother taught me that a woman does not destroy a room for the sake of destroying it, I sat down in Preston's chair. I did not raise my voice. What happens next is not revenge. It is correction. Preston Ashford, you will resign from the chairmanship of this company, effective immediately. You will sign the resignation letter currently in front of you. You will personally repay the $12,472,000 you have stolen, plus 8% interest, within 90 days. If you do this, and only if you do this, the Department of Justice has agreed not to pursue federal criminal charges. If you refuse, the FBI has a warrant waiting for your signature on the refusal. The agents are in the lobby of this building right now. Preston looked up at me. His eyes were wet. "Rosa," he said hoarsely, "please." I slid the resignation letter across the table. He signed it. I turned to Cameron Ashford. You will cooperate fully with the IRS investigation. You will pay every dollar of back taxes, plus penalties. You will resign from your position at this company today, and you will enroll in a 2-year supervised restitution program, administered by a nonprofit I will select, during which you will perform real work for real wages and learn what an honest day's labor looks like. If you do this, you will avoid prison. If you refuse, you will go to federal prison for 7 to 10 years. Cameron's face crumpled. For a moment, he looked about 12 years old. He nodded. He did not speak. I turned to Victoria. Victoria had lifted her head from the conference table. Her makeup was streaked. Her Chanel jacket was wrinkled. She looked, for the first time in the 12 years I had known her, like an actual human being instead of a performance. "Victoria Ashford," I said, "you will retain your position as Director of Marketing. You will report directly to me. You will enroll in and complete a 6-month cultural competency program taught by Judge Washington. You will write a public letter of apology to be published on the company's official platforms, acknowledging what you have done. And you will spend 1 Saturday a month for 1 year volunteering at the Jefferson Family Foundation's mentorship program for young Black women entering business careers. You will not post about it on Instagram. You will not mention it at the country club. You will do it because it is what you should have been doing your whole life. If you refuse any part of this, my attorneys will file for divorce on Tyler's behalf within the hour. I have already drafted the papers. Tyler will be represented by Harrison Whitmore. You will leave this marriage with exactly what you brought into it, which is a closet full of designer clothes and a trust fund your grandfather left you." Victoria sat completely still for about 15 seconds. Then she nodded. Once, very slowly. "I'll do it," she whispered. "I'll do all of it. Rosa, Mrs. Jefferson, Do not apologize to me today, Victoria. Words are cheap today. Show me in the next 12 months who you actually are. That is the only apology I am interested in." I turned, last, to my son. Tyler stood up. He walked around the conference table, past his wife, past his father-in-law, past his brother-in-law. And he stopped 2 feet in front of me. He was crying. Not politely, openly, the way he used to cry as a little boy when he was afraid. "Mama," he said. I waited. "Mama, I heard you, in the coffee shop. I heard you, and I didn't know what to do with it. I sat up all Thursday night thinking about Daddy, thinking about who he was, thinking about who I have not been. Mama, I am so sorry. I am so, so sorry." I looked at my son's face. I saw Samuel in it. I saw my own father in it. I saw my mother, Clara Mayfield, who had taught herself to read off fabric labels. I saw a man who had lost himself. I saw a man who might, just barely, still be able to find his way home. "Tyler," I said. "Yes, Mama. You have 1 year, 1 year of therapy, individual and marital, 1 year of showing me every single week that you remember who your father was, 1 year of being the man he believed you could be. If you do that, the $50 million your father left you in a conditional trust will be released to you on your 46th birthday." "Mama, I don't care about the money." "I know you don't, baby. That is not why I'm telling you. I am telling you because your father left you a test, and the test was never about money. It was about whether you would remember who you are. 1 year, start now, go home, sit down with your wife. Begin." Tyler nodded. He was still crying. He reached out very slowly, and he took my hand. He pressed it to his forehead, the way he had done when he was a small boy, and he whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me, Mama." And for the first time in 12 years, I let myself cry in front of my son. I stood up. I looked around the boardroom one last time. "One more announcement," I said, and my voice was steady again. "Effective the 1st of January, this company will be renamed Jefferson Ashford Holdings. A $20 million endowment will be established under the name of Samuel Jefferson to fund full scholarships for Black women pursuing graduate degrees in business, law, and finance. The first class will be admitted next fall. That is what this company will be remembered for, not the last 12 years, the next 12. I picked up the navy blue binder. I walked toward the door. A reporter from Forbes, who had been sitting in the back of the room the entire time, whom I had personally invited, stood up as I passed. "Mrs. Jefferson, one question if I may. Why did you wait 12 years? I paused at the door. I turned around. I looked at the woman asking the question, a young Black woman, maybe 32 years old, with a recorder in her hand. I smiled at her. "Because, young lady, some lessons can only be taught by time. And I believed, foolishly perhaps, that my family deserved every opportunity to show me who they really were. I am only sorry that it took them 12 years to show me, and that by the end, they showed me so clearly." I walked out of the boardroom. Harrison and Dorothy walked out beside me, and behind us, in this boardroom at the top of the tower, a family began the long, slow, painful work of becoming something better than what they had been. 6 months later, Tybee Island, Georgia, late May. The magnolia trees in the front garden of the Savannah house were in full bloom, enormous white blossoms the size of dinner plates, filling the evening air with a scent so sweet it almost hurt to breathe. I sat on the back porch in Samuel's old rocking chair, a glass of sweet tea in my hand, watching the sun go down over the marsh. Dorothy Washington sat in the chair beside me. She had come down for the weekend. So had Maxine and Beverly and the rest of the Magnolia Circle. They were inside, laughing in the kitchen, arguing about whether Maxine's cornbread recipe was better than Beverly's mother's. I could hear them through the open windows. It was the happiest sound in the world. "Rosa," Dorothy said quietly, "any word from Tyler this week?" "He called Sunday, same as always. He and Victoria finished their 4th month of therapy last Tuesday. He said the therapist told him he's making remarkable progress." "And Victoria?" I thought about that for a moment. Thought about the letter Victoria had written and published on the company's website back in December. Thought about the Saturdays she had been spending at the Jefferson Foundation's Mentorship Center, sitting in rooms full of young black women getting ready to enter the hardest industries in America. Thought about the email she had sent me 2 weeks ago, a long handwritten note actually, not an email, stamped and mailed, in which she had written, "Rosa, I have spent my whole life being taught that some people matter and some people don't. You spent 12 years in my house showing me how wrong that was, and I did not see it. I am learning to see it now. I do not expect forgiveness. I only want you to know that I am trying. Every day." Victoria, I had read that letter 3 times. I had not written back yet, but I had kept it, folded in the top drawer of Samuel's desk, next to the note he had written in the back of his will. "Victoria is doing the work," I told Dorothy. "Time will tell whether the work takes." "And Preston?" "Living in a 1-bedroom condo in Naples, Florida, playing golf at a public course, paid back every dollar. He sent me a Christmas card." "Cameron?" "Working in the records office of a non-profit that provides legal aid to black families in Fulton County. He hates it, which means it is exactly the right job for him. 6 more months to go." Dorothy chuckled softly. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the sky turn pink and gold and then deep violet. After a while, Dorothy said, "Rosa, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you forgive him, Tyler?" I watched a heron lift off the marsh grass, its long wings catching the last light. I thought about Samuel, holding our son up in the hospital in 1981, whispering, "This boy is going to change the world." I thought about a 9-year-old Tyler, asleep on his father's shoulder with Miles Davis playing quietly on the turntable. I thought about a 45-year-old Tyler crying in the Starbucks on West Paces Ferry Road, asking who he was when no one was watching. I thought about my mother, Clara Mayfield, who had told me when I was 7 years old that I was going to own the building they scrubbed floors in. I thought about every black woman who had ever been told she was nothing and had gone on to quietly become everything. And I thought about myself, 68 years old, alive. Finally, at long last, fully alive. "Dorothy," I said, "I forgave him the moment I gave him the chance to try. Forgiveness isn't the end of the story. It's the door that lets the story keep going." She nodded slowly. I took a long sip of sweet tea. I watched the fireflies start to rise up out of the grass, and I thought very quietly to myself, they spent 12 years looking past me. I used that time well.